Good day, everyone. So for this lecture, we're going to be talking about opinion writing in general. So I'd like to refer to most of the practice that we currently have when posting our thoughts in social media. We often have this tendency to pursue online debates or to pursue very toxic posts that most probably brings our reputation not necessarily to paths that we desire, but rather to those in which we present ourselves as a brutal community. So this video is actually an attempt for me to somehow to provide a guide or provide a standard for most to retune their toxic political posts into disciplined opinion writing formats. So, that being said, I'd like to divide this discussion into 5 matters. First things first, I'd like to discuss on the difference between the rant and of course a valid political take. What sets them apart? What sets the idea of a political rant, or what sets apart the idea of a rant and of course a political statement? What sets them apart? Number 2, of course, we need to discuss or we need to understand the concept of critical transparency. So, in times like this, we actually need to discuss matters on being biased and being neutral in times of public dissent and in times wherein we are faced with a crisis. So with that, we need to discuss the parameters between when to be biased and when to be neutral, or ultimately, should we do the both of them? Is there an existent ideology? Is there an existent idea that goes at the gist of things, that goes at the very essence of things? Number 3, of course, we need to identify a writer's tone. Your writing tone as the individual writer. What do we cohere to, and what do we need to consistently follow, and how do we develop our writing skills even further? Because as far as I'm concerned, and as a writer and also as a teacher, I always encourage students or fellow writers to develop their own tone. So we need to determine our tones based on what we actually read. Now, the fourth one, of course, is matters on structure. The very basic structure that we need to follow in terms of presenting our opinions need to be presented in such forms. So, aside from matters of structure, of course, we need to consult our write-ups with consistent proofreading. How do we self-edit, and of course, how do we reach out to other people in terms of asking them to edit our works? And of course, the fifth and the last topic that I'm going to be discussing, of course, is some tips on strengthening your write-up. How do we strengthen and how do we turn our write-up with that of a backboned write-up? So, with that being said, let's go to the first matter. I'd like to discuss the difference between a rant and a valid political take. So, the very least, we are exposed with such fallacious posts and commentaries that express themselves through memes. Let's say, for example, ikaw na lang magpresidente in an attempt to, they're actually suggesting that those who criticize government should actually take part in leading government itself, etc., etc. So essentially, that's already an existent fallacy in itself. It invalidates the opinion, or essentially it invalidates criticism in very general, much less constructive criticism. So, of course, di na lang manahimik at sumunod. Why don't you just shut up? Why don't you just remain quiet? Why do you just remain silent and just follow orders? So that's also one fallacious statement, and by far suggests neutrality. Third, of course, biglang naging political analyst. So essentially it strikes the lack of integrity that a certain person has and others like that. So, edi ikaw na magaling. This is by far, edi ikaw na magaling, okay, you're the genius, you're the smart one, etc., etc. This is by far one of the basic formats of smart shaming. And of course, if you're landed with this, you will be receiving immediate silence and immediate shame and others like that. That discourages you in pursuing public discourse. So, ultimately, what we learn from these posts is that we have this tendency of criticizing just how stupid these posts appear. And by far, that's arrogance. It's actually wrong for us to point out the fallacies of that, while in fact, the public is not really aware of the parameters of discourse. We could actually blame the educational system for the lack of literacy in which the opinions are actually presented. Therefore, for most intellectuals, for most of those who are actually membered in academia, or for those who are actually considering themselves as intelligent, they have this tendency to bash those who present these fallacies without even going to the very essence of why they actually resort to saying such fallacies. Now, I'm not saying that these fallacies are correct. I'm saying that these fallacies have a reason why they are manifested in each person. So, with that being said, I want to differentiate the idea of a rant and, of course, what is a valid political take in certain issues. So, we define a rant as one-sided and futile. One-sided in a sense that it only suffices the writer. It only suffices the writer and the group in which the writer or the author of the post belongs to. Let's say, for example, let's take the community of the Digong Duterte supporters, or the DPS as we might call them, or essentially the group that supports the government and the administration. They only provide rants that most probably want to see. They want to see progress. They want to support the president. They want to support whatever the government is actually pursuing and others like that. And in the process of that, they also post rants on opposing political parties, like of course the Dilawans or the Yellows, belonging to the spectrum of those who support the Aquinos, starting from Benigno Aquino Sr. and of course Cory Aquino, and of course the Marcosian community, or those who support former and deceased President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. So with that, we actually look at rants as one-sided. Therefore, it's futile to conduct debates with them. Why? Because a rant is only written for the sake of satisfying the takes of the author as well as the community that belongs in such. So by actually publishing these rants, we're not really pursuing anything that's positive. We're not really pursuing anything that's unifying at the very least. If anything, rants actually strengthens the divide that exists inside the country. It sustains this certain divide that for so long has been presented and has presented itself historically in the country. So ultimately, how do I view the intellectual posts that actually debunk those who are stubborn DDS supporters? Essentially, I view them as rants. They're just rants. And the very reason why they write these rants is to satisfy their intellectual achievement. They just want to convince themselves. They just want to convince themselves that they're actually socially relevant at the very least. Their social relevance by far is pathetically labeled in social media, the internet. So try removing the internet. So boom, you're not an activist anymore. So that's one thing that we need to idealize. So yes, the intellectual posts that are critical to the DPS instead of going to the issue itself is considered a rant. It's considered a rant. However you may put it, it only suffices one side. It only suffices the side of the author and the community that belongs to it. So essentially, a rant can be viewed as a form of masturbation. You're just satisfying your own belief. You're just satisfying your own logic, and by far increasing your integrity by doing so. You base the validity of your opinion on how you are patronized by your readers, by the number of likes that you have, by the number of shares, by the number of heart reactions, by the number of ha-has and others like that. So that's actually a very pathetic way of presenting ourselves in social media. While in fact, we can retune our statements into that of valid political takes. So whenever we consider something that is valid, or how do we consider our opinions as valid? It's because that it can be considered as something that can be discussed further. Does it necessarily attract debate? Yes, it may do so. Does it necessarily attract clarifications? Yes, it may do so. But the very point of doing the valid political take is, of course, to encourage discourse, to actually talk about the issue. The debates is by far the most primal and by far the most toxic ways of publicizing or, of course, encouraging the community to take part in the discourse, to actually go against those who are actually presenting ideas that are in total contrast with theirs. So, that's one thing that we need to consider when writing a political post on social media. We need to retune it into such a form that is actually relevant and well disciplined and by far has an integral structure that is found reliable. So of course, we need to understand matters on critical transparency. What is the idea of critical transparency? What is the idea of critical transparency? Basically, we need to recognize the existence of two truths. There are no truths at all. We do not really express ourselves as pursuance of truth because truth by far is unachievable. Truth is unachievable, especially in social media. You cannot really tell something that is true or not. But accuracy and facts are possible in doing so. So in that accuracy of facts, it can be divided into two parts. Of course, first thing is the perceived reality, the one that the person actually sees. And number two, the actual reality. So, take note that the perceived reality can exist in various points of views because the perceived reality is based on the number of perspectives that exist in such. It can be 2, it can be 3, it can be 5, it can be multiple takes in terms of how they view a certain issue or whatnot. But ultimately, we could only render the unity of these perceived realities into actual reality. There is only one actual reality, and we can only achieve that by combining and analyzing and synthesizing ultimately the perceived realities. That's the only way we can do that. And we have two approaches to get the gist and to analyze certain perspectives. First things first, we go to the bird's eye view or going above the situation. How do we look at the scenario beyond the ideas of a divide and whatnot? We don't necessarily take sides in this part. We need to balance the points or the validity of both sides. Yes, there is an existent validity on both sides. So we need to consider that. And the second thing that we could do, of course, is going into the gist of things or going with the very issues. We need to involve ourselves. In this approach, we involve ourselves with the actual practice of engaging in political discourse, engaging in social discourse. So, by that first-hand experience, what are our reflections? What are our takes? What are our analyses that might exist when involving ourselves with two contrasting or multiple contrast ideas that are present in the observable community, that are present in the observable political climate? So, now, after doing so, we need to identify a writing tone. A writing tone is by far one of the most basic requirements that a developing writer needs to have. Let's say, for example, my writing tone is influential based on the writings of Conrado de Quiros, and if I may cite a member of the Department of Foreign Affairs, Teddy Locsin Jr. I heavily take influence from Teddy Locsin Jr., from Conrado de Quiros, from Professor Luis Teodoro, from Ernest Hemingway, and others like that. So, developing the writing tone can actually come from the very context of your readers. Let's say for example, if you're a writer of poetry, you don't go to the essayist, you go to those who actually write poetry. What are their styles? What are their formats? What are their language tones and whatnot? What are the collection of words and the range of vocabulary that they use? Same thing goes for developing a writing tone. In writing tones, you tend to look for relevant authors that might share the same genre that you're actually pursuing. Let's say, for example, if you're pursuing an essay, you need to look for essayists or effective essayists in which you find comprehensible and by far those who actually present their ideas in the most comprehensive way. The formats that you want to derive your style from. So essentially, we need to look and we need to consider the idea that there are no original writing styles. There are no original writing styles. All writing styles always derive from a certain influence that comes from early stage materials and text publications and whatnot. So, we need to develop a writing tone. And by doing so, we also need to develop a set of authors in which we take heavy influence from. So this requires a lot of reading. But essentially, we need to take the notion that you cannot really write what you did not read. So reading is by far the gas that we have in our mobile, in our cars. Essentially, if we look at our brains as some sort of machinery, the energy the energy, or essentially the charge that enables the machinery to work or enables it to serve as a power source comes from reading. Reading is the power source of writing. That's what we need to understand. So therefore, we need to encourage ourselves to read a lot of formats, to read a lot of authors, a lot of writers and others like that. So, matters on structure. The structure could go as easy as these 4 parts. Or rather, let's first determine how to give a title for your opinion article. So, in writing the headline, you can actually take 2 things. First things first is the metaphorical headline. The metaphorical headline is restating the issue in another format. And let's say, for example, in describing the pandemic, we can describe the pandemic as a fiasco of some sort. We can describe the pandemic as a social disturbance and whatnot. So a metaphorical headline directly relates to the issue that is being assessed or being criticized. But in the process of that, they don't really mention the issue itself. Rather, in the headline of the opinion article, we go to the figurative and metaphorical representation of these social issues. That's one way to do it. And of course, another way to do the headline, of course, is deriving from the essence. What's the essence, or what's the gist, or what's the analysis of your article? So, by using this approach, by using the essence headline, you need to accomplish the piece first. You need to have a conclusion developed from your subtopics first in order for you to decide on a headline. That's where you base the headline. You base the headline on the conclusion if you're going to use the approach of essence headline. Now, let's go to the actual structure. This is by far not really the generic structure that most writers have, but this is by far the structure that I follow. This is the structure that I follow, by the way. So, the structure, we go to the thesis statement. Already state your opinion. Go to what your take is. Go to what you want to say, what your stand is. Do not give any other do not take any other words of it. Just go straight to the point. Because a lot of writers have this tendency to be too much distracted in terms of how they write their articles. So, in the thesis statement, we present our ideas straight and on point. Immediately give your opinion, immediately give your stance in the thesis statement. Now, after the thesis statement, after we express our stance, we divide our reasons on believing in such in certain points. Of course, we need to go to the subtopics. Subtopics, of course, can be presented as how you develop your reasons why you believed in your thesis statement. And one way to effectively write a subtopic, of course, is to rely on the idea of contrast. The idea of contrast may be as simple as comparing the positive notes to the negative notes and the synthesis. So that's as easy as it gets. So the third part, of course, is by far the collectivization of your subtopics, or very much so, your reflection of your subtopics. That goes to the analysis. The analysis is the very synthesis of your discussion as to why you believe your thesis statement, why you believe in a certain political stand that you already have in the thesis statement. And of course, after presenting the analysis, you conclude. You give your conclusions. You give what people need to do. This is the most important part of your write-up. You need to give people what they need to realize, what they need to learn from the write-up that you actually read. What they need to realize, what they need to understand, what they need to do to take part in the discourse that you're presenting in the opinion article. So the structure can go as easy as these 4 steps. But of course, they're not really that easy. They're not really as easy as much as written. But of course, this is a beginning structure that you could actually do. And by far, it's doable by anyone. Given your current linguistic maturity, it does not really matter if you use hyperlooping words or whatnot. I'm a type of writer and I'm a type of reader that prefers write-ups which are comprehensible, not really presenting themselves with sophisticated vocabulary and others like that. I always prefer simplistic vocabulary. So you don't really have to pressure yourself into using a lot of high terms, using a lot of sophisticated terms and others like that. So the most important part here is that during the discussion and during the progression of your structure, you don't go with the jargon. You do not provide any type of jargon in your write-up. So, after the structure, you go to the idea of proofreading. So in proofreading, you could either edit your work, you have the most reliable awareness of your article, so therefore we can look at ourselves as the first person that could actually criticize our papers. My routine is after I write the paper, I immediately read it to look for some grammatical errors that might exist in the article. After doing so, I distract myself by playing Call of Duty, I play Mobile Legends and just like that. Then after a moment or two, I go back to the article. I review it again, and only then am I able to find a lot of clarifications in terms of the article I just wrote. What do I want to read as a point, coming from the point of view of the reader? So you can use that technique by distancing yourself from the article from a little while, distracting yourself, and once you think that you shake off the thoughts that you just inked at the paper, you go back to the paper. You go back to the paper with tabularized mindset, with a mindset that is bereft from the awareness that you written the article. So in that way, you don't really influence yourself that this is enough. Rather, you need to challenge yourself to continuously look for errors that can be improved. Or, the easiest part, and by far the most laborious part, is look for an actual proofreader. Look for a friend or your teacher or a certain individual that you trust reading your article and have them proofread it, have them edit it. Always be open for additions. Always be open for criticism, because eventually in the long run of your writing career, should you pursue it, you would most probably need to be criticized in order for you to develop and bring your writing skills to its furtherment. So, now, my last points here is I'd like to present some tips on how to further strengthen our write-up. So, first step, of course, is to provide in-text citations. One way to make our articles more reliable is by citing more authors, more scenarios, data, numerical data at the very least, and others like that. So by presenting in-text citations, not only are you using yourself as a certain first-person opinion, rather you're actually taking from a lot of readings. And by far, this is a very manifestation of how you identify yourself as a writer. You identify yourself as a writer that has a rich reading collection. So, in providing in-text citations, this gives your article more integrity. It provides you with more reliability in terms of writing the article. Now, number 2, of course, we need to omit needless words. If I were to take from William Strunk Jr., from The Elements of Style. So, omit needless words. We need to review the article. We need to continuously review the article and re-express the terms in the simplest of formats. Always remember to go and cite to comprehensibility instead of the sophisticated form of your language. Because as far as I'm concerned, simpler language is better compared to sophisticated language. Because essentially, if you have simpler language, you'd have a wider audience that appreciates you. If you have sophisticated wordings, then frankly speaking, you're being an elitist writer. You're just masturbating at that point. You're just satisfying your you're just satisfying your need to have people tell you na, oh wow, you have such rich vocabulary, you're such good in the use of that language. No. It ironically proves that you're not really that much of a good writer if you use out of context words or words that cannot really be understood by the layman or the common folk. So as writers, we need to develop this idea of being accessible to a wide range of readers. So ultimately, intellectual humility is what we need to practice. Number 3, of course, is always use the third person point of view. By the way, my write-ups were heavily influenced by Luis Teodoro, Teddy Locsin Jr., Conrado de Quiros, Ernest Hemingway. They always use the first person point of view. But I always prefer myself to use the third person point of view. Why? Because it encourages me to use more words, to use more forms of expressions. You'll actually be surprised if you use the third person point of view more. Why? Because by doing so, you're actually increasing the possibility of you pursuing various types of writing styles. You'd also be able to discover more words due to the scarcity of words or the scarcity in your vocabulary. So always pursue third person point of view because it's by far the most appreciated form with the most amount of integrity. Now, number 4, focus on unifying points. Avoid going to the idea of using your opinions as mere rants. Rather, always retune your ideas into that of unifying points of view. You need to always unify people in terms of what you actually write. So, by doing so, your write-up is not really elitist. It becomes inclusive in the process, in which you're always open for second opinions. You're always open for contrasting opinions. And once you healthily approach these opinions, you start to garner support coming from the various points of view that actually exist. And this makes you a respectable writer. That's the most important thing that you need to achieve. You need to be a respectable writer. You need to be someone that actually serves as a rendezvous point from all of the existing political perspectives. Well, you always have the option to be toxic, but there are already a lot of toxic people in social media. So don't include yourself as one of them. Don't include yourself as one of those who are actually arrogant. So, number 5, go beyond the difference of opinion. Always be critically transparent. Present the opinion of present the opinion of the other side, present the opinion of the primary side, present a third-party opinion if there is one. So, we need to look for a lot of perspectives before we synthesize and analyze them into generalized statements. Before we conclude, we need to make sure that we're able to suffice all of the points of view. Otherwise, we're just turning the article in a one-sided point of view, and that is by far biased. So we don't have to be biased. I don't really like biased write-ups. I always prefer write-ups that are critically transparent, that are somehow providing rendezvous points for unity. So, that being said, the last tip that I have for you is, of course, to read. As I said earlier, if you cannot really write something that you haven't really read upon. So, we're not, as writers, especially if you're going to be students, you're not really immediate experts on certain things. Therefore, you already have enough reason to provide yourself with a rich reading resource. You need to expose yourselves to a lot of reading materials before you pursue writing. Or at the very least, if you want to develop or you want to improve your writing skills, then read. Collect certain authors in which you find appalling, in which you find interesting, and others like that. And of course, derive your writing structures from your most influential authors. The authors in which you most probably admire, and others like that. So, ultimately, I'd like to end this lecture with William Shakespeare's line, or rather, the line of Polonius in Hamlet: brevity is the soul of wit. We can actually express our ideas in such short formats, and ironically, it has large contextual implications. So by actually saying less, we actually mean more. So, that being said, that ends my lecture for that. So, If you like this discussion, if you like this video, please leave a like on the video. And of course, if you somehow view this video, or please share this video to those who think they might need it. So, thank you very much. So, ultimately, stay safe and send love.